I'm William Romine. I'm an associate professor at Wright State in the Department of Biological Sciences. I do research in educational measurement. The short answer, I guess, is that measurement is a creative process that really requires understanding of the culture in which your practice is embedded. So there's a cultural element to measurement. You have to understand the theory or the philosophy behind what you're trying to measure. And so that's where you get into the scientific and the mathematical and the philosophical aspects of what you're doing. And then what you have to do is put together an instrument to actually collect the measures and calibrate that instrument appropriately and show that it actually produces valid measures of what you're trying to measure. And so in that sense, that's where the creative aspect comes in. And that's my favorite part of my job, is actually using these observations to construct measures of what we're trying to measure. So whether it's mental effort, or whether it's your interest in science, or whether it's cognitive flow, or whether it's your knowledge of influenza, you could construct a measure for anything as long as you understand the theory behind what you're trying to measure, and you can come up with a series of observations that aligns with that theory. If we want to construct a measure for something, we have to have a theoretical idea of what we're going to measure first and foremost. So there has to be some theory or some philosophy. So, if we're going to measure distance, for example, taking one of the measures that we take for granted every day, we have to have some framework for what distance means, that's culturally relevant. So, in ancient England, the king's foot was culturally relevant. So, okay, that's a foot, right? Or, the king's hand, okay, that's a hand, right? And so that was culturally relevant, But in France, they wanted something, back in the late 1700s, they wanted something that was a little more standard. And so, okay, let's use the Earth's circumference as a framework for, establishing the meter as a unit of length. We have 10 fingers and 10 toes, so we like the number 10. So it makes sense that the metric system is designed on powers of 10. It makes me wonder, if we had 11 fingers, if I had 6 fingers on my right hand, right, and everyone did, then, maybe we'd have powers of 11. I don't know. But, that cultural embedding is important. So you have to have a theory, you have to understand the cultural embedding of what you're trying to do. Then you have to come up with a creative way to observe what you're trying to measure. And so in measurement, we value repeatability. So we can't just observe something once, we have to observe it over and over and over. So when your teacher gives you a test, they don't just give you typically one question. They give you maybe 10 questions or 20 questions or 50 questions. So those are basically 50 opportunities to observe your knowledge or your ability to do something. So that's really key to good measurement. And then we have to have a model for interpreting the measures, right? So, okay, now we have all those observations. Now how are we going to interpret those? So are we going to, take the average of your score, or are you going to, there's different ways you can interpret a measure. That's the idea behind measurement. The empatic AE4 collects electrodermal activity data, or we also call it galvanic skin response. So that's basically the change in the conductivity of your skin due to sweating. So if you've ever been surprised or been embarrassed, like you get that flushed feeling on your body, that's galvanic skin response. If you're exercising, you start sweating and kind of feeling hot, that's galvanic skin response. So that can be induced in various ways. And so it's really interesting to see, okay, what's the change in the galvanic skin response?
Yeah, I know what you're going to do to me.
Yeah, okay.
So this is the actual, which sensor? This is the
empatic AE4 sensor.
Okay, empatic AE4.
Yep.
So I should be pretty relaxed at this point.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it should be pretty
All right.
relaxed.
And what is this again?
This is an acupressure mat. So this is supposed to be soothing if you lay down on it. And I don't find it very soothing.
That looks painful.
Yeah,
So
I tend to agree.
I think it's making me nervous already.
Oh,
So I'm
okay.
curious to
Yeah.
see what kind of readings we get. So we're going to set this down.
Yep.
And what are we going to do?
You're gonna take your shoes off and socks off and
Okay.
step on it. You know, in science, like we want to have a control. So right now, this is the control period. So this is the
No s-
time when nothing's going on with.
In theory,
having
I'm
calm.
normal.
Yeah, in
even
theory,
though-
you're not in any pain right now.
Although I know it's going to happen.
Yeah, the anticipation, you can see that also in the device.
Yeah, I
possibly.
think I'm more nervous about getting on it than probably what it feels like because I'm worried about what this is going to do.
Yeah.
All right, should I try it now?
Sure, let's go for it. Yeah,
Both
see
feet?
what happens. Yep. Yep.
Oh, that's so. Yeah,
Is that pretty intense?
that's pretty intense. I can take. It's starting to feel more painful, but it's bearable. How long should I stay on here?
I don't know, 5 minutes maybe?
5 minutes? I know how I'm feeling right now.
Yeah.
So I'm guessing it's indicating I'm probably stressed.
Yeah, stressed or, yeah, I mean, stressed is kind of a general term, but
Can I step off if I have to?
sure, yeah, yeah.
Oh.
If you need a period of relief.
That.
Yeah,
Okay.
so yeah, you've stepped on it, then maybe we can stay off of it for a minute and have like a recovery period.
Yeah, so now we can
and
see
what that looks like.
because I'm already feeling like that really hurt a lot.
One thing I'm really focused on with a device like this, you know, before I use it in research and, you know, recruit a big sample of people and then, you know, try to, you know, spend hours collecting data. You know, one thing I like to do just on myself is just see, okay, how well does this thing work? So, you know, we've all felt the pain of test anxiety or being nervous, or, you know, you felt the pain of boredom. And so, you know, it's maybe a little harder to induce a state of boredom or, you know, anxiety. But, you know, something like an acupressure mat, you know, it just sends a surge of pain through your feet that's therapeutic and excruciating at the same time. And so, hey, that's great. I can just step on the acupressure mat and see what happens with these physiological data. And, you know, if it detects my change in heart rate or galvanic skin response or skin temperature when I step on the acupressure mat, then that gives some promise that maybe it can detect these things when I am in a state of anxiety or a state of boredom or a state of, you know, relaxed flow, you know. So that's kind of how I use these types of things. Now I'm going to plug it in. It should, hopefully. Good. All right, so we have one session to sync. Let's take a look at some of these signals here. So the top blue one is the EDA signal, or electrodermal activity, or sometimes we call it galvanic skin response. You know, we can see that up here, you know, the 2 or 3 minute baseline. And then this is when you got on the mat. And you can see what's happening here. You know, definitely an electrodermal activity or galvanic skin response. And you know, this is the point at which you're starting to hit the wall, right? Like you start to feel overwhelmed.
Right.
Like, oh, I can't do this anymore.
And that's when I come off of it.
Yeah. And then that's when you come off of
Instantly,
it.
like
Pretty
at
instant.
flat lines.
Yeah, pretty instant. If we think about something like length or something like temperature or something like energy or something like force or something like pH, we have a really strong physical understanding of what these things mean. And so it's comparatively straightforward then to find ways to measure those things. On the other hand, if I want to talk about cognitive flow, so what does that actually mean? Like, what do we mean by cognitive flow? And so one of the things we encountered in our research is there's a lot of aspects of cognitive flow. You know, so for example, It's whether or not the extent to which you find an activity rewarding is related to your tendency to achieve flow, or having a task that is situated within your ability level, so it's not too easy or not too hard. That's really key to changing your tendency toward flow. Your transformation of time perception. So when you're in a flow state, time just you kind of lose awareness of your body and the ticking of the clock and all that. And if you're ever in a flow state, you come out of it, it's like, oh, where'd the time go? And so that tends to be a fairly important thing. And so how do you measure all that? That's where it becomes squishy, because I can develop a measure to measure flow, and you can develop a measure to measure flow, and it might be conceptualized a little bit differently. And so we really have to understand the theoretical basis behind what we're trying to measure. If your teacher is measuring your knowledge of multiplication, right, or your knowledge of spelling, the teacher has to have a fairly strong theoretical understanding of what they're trying to measure. Otherwise, the score doesn't really mean anything. And so that's the challenging thing. And that's what makes it squishy, is that our theoretical basis for a lot of these educational quantities and these psychological quantities, or we call them constructs, is perhaps a little bit more subjective and not quite as strong as what we see in the physical sciences, right? Everyone can agree on what a Newton is if we talk about force. Not everyone can necessarily agree on what flow means, or what mental effort means, or what knowledge of influenza means, or your interest in the COVID pandemic. What does that mean? So we have to be, in some sense, a lot more rigorous in developing these measures. And what happens ultimately is a lot of times measurement just gets thrown out the window when we study education or psychology, because measurement's so challenging. A bigger part of my job, in my opinion, is training students to pursue the careers that they want to pursue, right? So, I had a student come in and say, oh, I want to be an analyst for the FBI. And, I want to do my doctoral work on bioterrorism. And so it's like, okay, we'll find the resources we need to help you do that. And I'll just suffice to say that student is in the career that they wanted to be in. Data analysis is great. Jobs in data are great. Research is great, and the fact that it's interesting, you can look at the problem in a lot of different ways, but also tends to be fairly flexible. You don't have to be confined to an office. I can come to the office if I want. I can work from home if I want. If I want to go to a coffee shop and work, I can do that. Sometimes I hike out into the woods and just sit and work on my laptop until my battery dies, and then it's time to come home. And just a lot of freedom, which is really awesome. And that's really what I want from my students, is to find a career that works for them. And it's not only intellectually stimulating, of course they want to be able to make a decent salary, but also something that, lets them live the life that they want to live, so achieve the work-life balance that they want to achieve. And that's really important too.